Awesome. Thank you, friend. Um, so hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our event today, hosted by the NASPA Asian Pacific Islander Knowledge Communities Region 5 and 6 representatives. My name is Dhaval Patel. I use he, him, his pronouns. I currently serve as the Region 5 representative for the APIKC. I also serve as a community director here at Pacific Lutheran University within their Res Life department. And so with that being said, I do want to say I am on call. So if I ever do have to step away for any moment, my esteemed colleague April will take over as your moderator. But yeah, thank you so much for joining our panel, Asian American Expats of Student Affairs. We are joined today by 4 amazing panelists who are very excited to share their stories with you all. Especially in this time of COVID and shifting of employment, hiring, recruiting needs for many companies, organizations, and institutions, there are many folks who are considering, are considering, or are looking for other avenues to explore beyond a student affairs role or student-facing department. We hope with this conversation, you will learn more about the intersections of student affairs work and other industries, as well as feel comfortable in taking the brave step to explore additional options in your job search or career journey. At this time, I want to introduce our panelists who will turn on their videos one by one as I share their bios. First up is Jean Liu, who is a Senior Learning and Development Specialist at Alameda Health System, a healthcare company with 7 hospitals in its portfolio in the San Francisco Bay Area. She recently made a switch out of higher education and student affairs as she has various experiences in career counseling, career development, exploration and planning, decision-making, college admission guidance, academic advising, diversity recruitment and retention, and public speaking. Previously, Jean also explored the field of finance and realized that that wasn't a good fit. She is a lifelong learner and believes in exploring through trial and error to continue growth personally and professionally. Welcome, Jean. Next up, we have Leslie Chanthaphasouk, who is a lead project manager in the Transformation Management Office Center of Excellence for the Central IT Organization at the University of Southern California. After graduating from UCLA with a Master's of Education in Student Affairs, she spent the last 8 years working in previous functions in higher education involving diversity and inclusion, international programs, marketing and communications, and most recently moved into IT. On a personal note, Leslie is a first-gen college graduate, Lao American, and the proud daughter of refugees. She currently resides in Orange County, California. Welcome, Leslie. Next up, we have Michele Lee, who is a diversity and inclusion manager for talent management at Morgan & Lewis, one of the largest global law firms chaired by a woman. Prior to her official D&I role at the firm, she worked in business development and marketing. During her time in higher education, Michele was involved with residential life, cross-cultural centers, and admissions. Welcome, Michele. Lastly, we have MyLinh Hoang, who is currently a higher education expat working in corporate human resources, specifically as an HR assistant at WorkCare. Her previous higher education roles include residence life and student engagement. Her experiences include private and public institutions ranging from small to large. She is an alumna of the University of California in Riverside and Indiana State University. Welcome, MyLinh. If you all could help me welcoming these guests by putting in either the percentage sign or ampersand into the chat as an acknowledgement, that would be greatly appreciated. So, to our amazing panelists, thank you so much for being here today. And let's dive into the first question. You can go in any order you want, but for your first question, and a big question from our audience is, how did you get where you are today? When did you know it was the right time for you to transition out of student affairs? Was there a significant moment? What were you looking for that was similar to and different from your student affairs or higher education background?
I'll go ahead and go first. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Chanthaphasouk. Thank you for everyone for putting this together. I actually, as Dhaval had said, I graduated with my master's in student affairs back in 2013 from UCLA, and actually did first my 2 years in student affairs in Texas at Texas Christian University, working in multicultural programming there. And so after about 2 years, I was looking for a way to come back to California. Love Texas, love the people there, but really missed home. And so the way that I got out of student affairs was actually trying to come back to California. So it was a lot of luck. And so it was an interesting experience for me because I kind of casted a wide net. I came from a diversity background, but also worked in leadership development and also taught abroad before I actually went into grad school in student affairs. So I had all these experiences that I can pull from. And I actually had applied for a study abroad advisor position at Cal State Fullerton. Unfortunately, didn't get the position, but was offered another position as a special projects coordinator for the dean at the time. So that was actually the first time that I actually was able to kind of start to transition out of student affairs. Again, it was out of luck. I wasn't looking to leave. I was really looking to come back to California and be with family and friends. But that really started to open up the world to me in terms of what else can I do with the skill set that I have. It was kind of all over, my job description kind of was all over the place in terms of international programs as well as extension, international agreements, international partnerships. And the interesting thing is that I knew really nothing about that. Really what they saw in me was kind of a potential, right? The skill set that I had working in student affairs and diversity, they saw that they could actually use me in different functions. So long story short, the biggest thing for me, luck and casting a wide net. And I was able to explore places and competencies and functions that I would have never thought. So I'm open to elaborating on any one of those things, but I'm gonna kick it to my colleagues for their story.
Hi, folks. So a little bit about how I got to where I am. About a year into my previous position, which was at a small private, traditionally women's institution. So it was a very niche situation to be in. But in that year that I was there, or at the end of my first year, we went from a department of 6 to 4 to 3. And the reasons that everyone left was generally the same as the site. The environment wasn't great. The leadership weren't developing us in the ways that we thought would be useful or helping us grow, whether it's out or inside of higher education. And so that's when I started asking, like, maybe this isn't the place to be. And so then naturally, I would start looking at other higher ed positions. And as the time went on, the stress kind of started physically manifesting, whether it's in like my muscles and kind of my emotions, and a lot of things are happening. And so I was realizing, like, maybe it's not this job, just this job, but it could potentially be the field as a whole. And I think, it's nice to be able to do other tasks as a side, but I think there's a lot of that is taken for granted, especially in higher education. And so I started looking outside my role, or in order to kind of get my role. I was also a little bit lucky in the sense that my current role was through a referral from a friend who was currently in the company. So partially luck, really work on your network. I know a lot of folks in APIKC do a lot of work both in and outside of higher education. So network, use your folks around you, and also recognize that everything you do in higher education is very transferable. I know it feels very niche, but there is a way to translate it over, and all your skill sets are very valuable. I know it's hard during the transition, but I think that was a big step in getting me where I am now.
Hi folks, again, my name is Michelle, and to just start off by answering how I got here. So I used to work in residential life before moving on from there. And I had been in residential life, I believe it was my 6th year. So I was in res life for undergrad, grad, and professional. And at one point I had gotten a little bit burnt out from being on call 24/7, and I'm sure many of you all are. In addition to having a lot of additional duties as assigned, and that can really mean a lot of things. And although I loved working with students and helping them develop, I realized that at one point, is this really worth it? My mental health, my self-care, in addition to kind of looking at that bank balance and looking at all the student loans and thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to do this, right? And as a first-generation college student and first-generation professional in my family, I really had to think about, when my parents get older, can I afford to take care of them? And as an only child, I really had to think about that. And so I kind of looked at, and I hate to say this, but when you are a California state public employee, your salary is up online. And so I looked at kind of the different trajectory tracks of the folks that I want to be. So a director of XYZ department, and then kind of looked at their salaries and wondered to myself, am I going to be able to function living off campus, paying off these student loans, being able to take care of my parents down the year in 5, 7, 10 years? And the answer was no. And so with that, I kind of looked at what made me happy on a job. Was it the relationship building part? Was it the event planning part? And I kind of put feelers out there to see what kind of positions I would get outside of student affairs. And luckily, I landed a business development marketing position at a law firm. And that was kind of what led me to my path here, where I currently work as a D&I manager at another law firm. And kind of those touching points that made me realize it was time to leave was really about myself and my family, and where I was going to be down the line.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jean. And when did I know it was time to go? So I've been thinking about this for some time, and I wanted to move to the Bay Area. So spent most of my time in the Los Angeles area, and I had to take a scenic route. So the scenic route was to go through a university, and then maybe at that time get to my geographically desirable area, and then go from there. Because it's really difficult to just jump from one place physically to another, especially if you don't know what it is that you want to do. So that was also part of my problem, is a program manager in higher ed, it does not translate to a program manager at a company. So they have different definitions. So that's kind of where taking a scenic route gave me some time to really reflect on what it is I want to do outside of higher ed. I had originally wanted to go into tech. So I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go to a tech firm, and oh, where are they all at? They're in the Bay Area. So that was part of my thought process. And to answer your other question of when did I know it was time, I actually will be honest with you all, I just wasn't learning anything new. I've been working in career services. So that's my student affairs background, career services of over a decade. And I just wasn't learning anything new. I still liked students. So that part was very exciting of working with students. But in terms of more of I had to feed into my learner, you know, the strengths finder, Gallup strengths. So learner is one of my top 5. And I just felt like I was really bored. So that's the truthfully honest is that's when I know that it was time to start thinking of what else to do. So fast forward to, so I got to the Bay Area, worked at a university, and the first couple of months I was there, during the daytime, I gave it my all at my new job. However, 5 o'clock, I went to every networking event that was available in San Francisco. And let me tell you, there were plenty. And then COVID happened. So then COVID happened, then that kind of put a wrench in my plans. So then I had to figure out how to do that remotely. So but I'm sure we'll get to the other questions. I'll cover a little bit more details in just a moment.
Thank you all for sharing. For our next question, did your Asian American identity influence and or impact your decision / transition out of student affairs?
I guess we can go in the same order as a first question. I don't think my Asian American identities per se kind of influenced me leaving student affairs, but I did have to echo what Michele was saying in terms of monetary benefit. And it sounds really, really greedy, but when you're talking about having to look after your parents, right? And that's something that is pretty prevalent within our community, to be able to be that generation, not only having your own kids, but taking care of your parents at the same time. Earning potential is part of the gig, right? And that's why actually when I transitioned, I still currently work in higher education, but I work in IT. I did see a lot more potential within IT. And also to Jean's point about learning, right? Dhaval was talking to me about, or talking about how I've worked all over higher ed. A lot of it had to do with trying to find that transferability to industry, right? So I worked in marketing communications, I worked in IT, project management is kind of my bread and butter right now. And a lot of it is kind of going this long route, this scenic route of how do I get myself into industry? Because I know deep inside, I believe in the mission of higher education. And I believe in making a difference for students. But I think there's a point where you kind of not grow out of it, but your own journey kind of takes you in a different way, right? So again, going back to the question about identity, I think a lot of it has to do with my parents being refugees, my parents being immigrants, and having that kind of pressure in a way to look after the community, right? And to be a role model for the community as well. So that would be kind of my piece in terms of identity and how that influenced my way of transitioning out of student affairs.
Very similar to what everyone has kind of shared previously about kind of, does staying in higher education allow us to sustain the life that we want or potentially expand it and things like that. I was also previously residence life, so, you know, the free housing and the free food and free gyms, like on paper, it sounds really great, and it was, I'm not saying it wasn't. But they also use that as an excuse to keep you on 24/7. You know, you take on additional roles and things that you aren't really being fairly compensated for. And at what point is your mental health worth it? I know mental health can be a little bit of a touchy issue, especially in our community. When I did start transitioning over or considering it, my family was very like, you get all these free things. Why would you want to step away from that? Which, fair point. But then I also was like, it's really not worth the stress that is happening. Also, there is a ceiling, there is a cap at some point. And so I'd rather maybe take a little bit of a lower pay straight out of the gate to be able to transition into the industry or the roles that I want. And then maybe be able to recoup that once I am able to transition to different roles. Because in higher education, it's very, you know, everybody needs a master's to start. And then if you want to go anywhere with the word director, associate, anything, you might need, 3 other letters behind your title. And that's, more additional investments you have to put in versus people are directors of their companies in other fields with a bachelor's. And so it was a lot of explaining to my family why I'm doing this thing that is giving up a lot of free resources. And I think that impacted in a way that made it maybe a little bit harder or tricky to leave, because it is a big thing you're giving up. But for me, at the end of the day, I recognize that if I'm doing this for me, and I'm also hoping that in being able to earn more or kind of separating myself from higher education, being able to have that extra time to spend with family as well. Because previously, holidays and on call is a very tricky thing. And so kind of being able to tell them yes, I'm giving up maybe monetary value temporarily, but making it up in other ways. It's, they're still kind of in the questioning phase, but at the end of the day, I've already done it, so we can't really go back from there.
And I won't repeat what Leslie and MyLinh has said. I will say that my Asian and American identity has actually influenced my D&I work. So I would say that because I wanted a full-time D&I position, that has made me want to leave student affairs into a different D&I capacity.
So for me, my experience of my identity is a little bit similar to MyLinh's. So I'm a first generation in my family to go to college and etc. So I did not tell my family about my plans to leave higher ed because similarly, MyLinh mentioned that, oh, why are you going to give up this and that, oh, stable, etc. So I actually told my family after after everything has solidified, because maybe a lot of you can relate that your family members may have a lot of opinions and they might add additional unnecessary stress to your search, or maybe you're taking this time to reflect what it is that you want to do. So it's okay to tell them after the fact. In terms of my identity and transitioning out on a more serious note, I wouldn't necessarily say that I thought about, oh, my identity. I felt that what's more important at the time was to truly understand what it is that you want to pivot to. Because I can guarantee you that a lot of times they will see your resume and will kind of ask you, so what can you do for us? So that's where I didn't necessarily consider my background or whatnot ethnically to figure that out, but really take the time, because I was considering 3 different channels to pursue outside of higher ed, and they range from, like earlier I mentioned, program management. What does that really mean for a corporation? There's customer success, which is a very hot industry right now. So that's another area that a lot of student affairs expat folks can go into because of the transferable skills or what I'm doing now, learning and development. So, and there's always, HR generalist, recruiter, etc. So there's a whole bunch of things. So that's where I kind of focused more on in terms of reflecting before transitioning out. And through that kind of took place last year. So during COVID, you balance your time working with students, and then maybe you kind of jot down different notes. So that was kind of what I did, was just to really reflect and also be mindful of job descriptions that you read, because a lot of times different definitions, different titles, they have different meanings. So just take your time.
Thank you all. So we do have a question from the audience. So following up on what you've shared, are there any traumas from student affairs that have stuck with you after your transition out? And what are some ways to heal from toxic or abusive student affairs work environments?
I can take that one, or at least from the red. So I did Red Life, both public, private, and then I also did like live on student engagement. I also got into higher ed through Red Life, so like the backbone of my higher education career. I don't own an iPhone, so that ringtone is just not in my life anymore. And then I think so. Me personally, I did a lot of mental health work once I left. I also moved back home for the first time since I was like 18. So I definitely like made sure that I set boundaries with my family so that I had space to heal from higher education. I made sure to find therapists that understood kind of, my cultural identity, kind of the background that I came in work environment wise, because it's very, high strung, high touch, depending on kind of the calls you've gotten in your higher residential life experience, it was a lot. And so it does stick with you. And I think the main thing that I would suggest is really be very intentional. Technically, it's hard to want to take the time out to heal from it, right? Because you just started a new job, you're switching careers, maybe you're dealing with family questioning you. It's very easy to say like, oh, I'll just do that later. Really force yourself to sit down, and whether it's journaling, talking to a therapist, also talking to friends outside of higher education. I think while it's nice to have friends that do understand what you do for work, sometimes it then turns into, oh, you don't have it that badly because someone from so-and-so institution dealt with this thing. And, this is not a competition about who has it worse. Sometimes you just want to talk to folks outside of higher education that are like, oh, you've dealt with a lot. And that's when you start also realizing that's not normal to do a lot of the things that we did do, or maybe we weren't properly trained, compensated, whatever the case might be, which also does help inform your search. Because then you also realize, oh, I have all these skill sets that I definitely could be utilized in different fields that I never realized before. Because a lot of times people will say like, oh, like, did you consider this career in this? And so for me, I was very intentional. I knew that the minute I left, I had to build my own healing. And I did that in ways that I know worked for me. I know it is also from a place of privilege to be able to, go to therapy and things like that. But if those aren't available to you, then really just reaching out to folks that are able to listen and talk to you, because you do need to decompress. Higher education is a great place and we do a lot of good work, but we also expect a lot out of our people who do put in those good work, and often we don't check in on those people. So
Wanted to say ditto to that. And the other part is to keep in mind that your work doesn't define who you are. Hopefully you have hobbies or friends and family, significant other that complements what you do for work. So I'm sorry to hear that there was trauma, but hopefully you can find your support through talking it out and to just maybe get professional help and work it out with a therapist, and just keep an eye on the prize that your work doesn't define you.
I will also add that as a former Red Lifer for the past 6 years in student affairs, part of that trauma is definitely just making sure that you don't overwork yourself, because I think that when you work in student affairs, part of just the regular routine is just to overwork yourself 24/7 because you're always technically on call. And part of my untraining myself when I started working was to not do that. So it honestly just takes a lot of time. And I say that given that it's been a couple of years since I've been on student affairs, and I still don't like hearing that duty ringtone. And whenever I see a flip phone, I'm just like, nope, I'm out of here.
So as we continue, another question that was on people's minds, do any skills in your student affairs experience currently help you in your day-to-day work?
For me, definitely, in terms of student affairs, I think one of the biggest pieces about student affairs and student affairs training, if for the folks that do have a master's in it, is that self-awareness piece. I remember in grad school, you do a lot of kind of that identity development. You go through kind of your whole journey, your family story, the immigrant story for me, all that type of self-exploration. And that truly informs kind of how you work with other people, right? I think working in IT, I think a lot of people move up due to their technical prowess, right? And they get to leadership positions and that self-awareness isn't always there. And so we're talking about emotional intelligence, we're talking about leadership skills, we're talking about facilitation skills. All these are skills that you learn within student affairs. And even being resourceful, right? One of the biggest things, I worked at a public university for a while, is like, you got to make something out of nothing, right? And so it's interesting when you go to industry that when there's a lot more resources to do things, you can be ultimately so much more creative in that aspect because you learned how to work with very little. So I think for me, the self-awareness piece is a big piece for student affairs that I use in my daily, just leadership skills in general, getting people to work together and getting people to empathize with each other. And then being resourceful is probably the third thing that rounds out. And then learning how to teach others how to be resourceful as well.
So I can go next. So definitely all the soft skills. So similarly to what Leslie mentioned, but additional soft skills of teamwork, collaboration, analytical communication, all those things that you use every single day, maybe you don't realize it. The thing that you have to translate for your audience outside of student affairs is that you're gonna have to delete words like students from your vocabulary. Because right now, when people see that you work with over 200 students, they might think, so why should we hire you? So maybe instead of using the words like students, maybe they can be clients, individuals, other synonyms that are more corporate speak. So that would be one suggestion, but definitely don't be afraid. You all have the skills in student affairs to help you land your next role, but you're just going to have to speak it in a way that someone can understand and translate what you have done.
So what a great segue. So speaking of more of that student affairs speak and private industry speak, can you share any other tips or resources that you use to convert your resume or even your interview skills and vocabulary from student affairs speak into private industry speak?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo changing out things that have the word student. You know, technically all of our students are, by definition of the law, adults. So they are employees, they are workers. I know oftentimes we use words like student leaders or maybe they're student employees. At the end of the day, they are still employees. You are a supervisor, you've managed, you've interviewed, assessed, I'm sure, I mean, you know, you've had hard conversations with them. Everything that you've ever done in student affairs can absolutely transfer over. It might feel a little weird at the beginning calling your students like clients or customers, or, you know, angry parents are, you know, just upset clients. You do a lot of customer service. And so I think the key thing for me when I translated my resume was recognizing that everything I did in higher education is stuff that I would do in any other industry. I picked human resources specifically because that's kind of like the easiest transition for all of my bullet points on my resume. But a lot of times, just go look up your wildest dreams of the job that you want on LinkedIn, look at the resume and see what they're asking for, and then ask yourself, have you done it? Because a lot of times, sometimes you'll be like, it's a little bit more industry specific, right? They're like, oh, have you looked up in human resources system? And then you realize like, oh, maybe I've not. But have you worked with other programs that your institution has, whether it's a specific version or things like that? And you realize, yes, you have experienced it, or if you've onboarded or hired folks through certain programs that your institution works with, still transferable. And it's very helpful to compare whatever job that you want to your current resume, because you know kind of they already use exactly the words that they want you to have. You just have to ask yourself, have you ever had experience or something similar? I think also to touch on the part about kind of translating your skills over, sometimes certain skills aren't as either well recognized or as valuable in certain places. Like Res Live, trying to explain being on call to some folks, it's not something that they will ever ask you to do in a corporate setting. And so sometimes, yes, there's a lot of sweat and tears, but sometimes you just omit that because it takes up a bullet point that could go towards another skill set that you could have, and it's barely ever going to come up in an interview anyways. So just recognizing if there are things that you do in your job daily in higher education, but it's not something on a bullet point you've ever seen in a job description, wherever you want to go, you might just have to cut it, even though it might hurt a little, but you just have to.
One of the best pieces of advice I've received from people when applying to large companies is that in order to get through their ATS system, you have to have your resume as closely tied into the job description as possible without completely copying it. And that's kind of one way that I've seen folks pass through that ATS round to actually get to the recruiter. The additional piece of it is if you already have a contact at that company, it's nice to have a reference to it so that your resume can actually get looked at and taken seriously by folks who are looking and by the hiring managers.
Wanted to add on a little bit more. So definitely converting your words. Also, the part afterwards is the interview, right? So the resume gets your foot in the door, but the interview gets you the job. So this is the part where you're going to have to think about, okay, so what stories are you going to tell to when you're at the interview that's going to relate with the position you're applying for? So that, taking it one step further. So even though you managed a crisis for a duty call or whatnot, that's handling stress management, right? So maybe a question that people might ask you, how do you handle stress, or how do you delegate work or prioritize your priorities, projects, etc. So that's a commonly asked interview question. So this is where you're going to bring out your stories, and the point is to be memorable. So you can describe in detail, maybe, the bathroom's flooded in the residence halls and you had to call facilities. So how did you go through that process from point A to B to solve this problem, and then help translate that to whatever you're applying for? So the stories will make you memorable, because I'm sure nobody else will be talking about toilets flooding in their interviews. But the point is, you're going to need to seal the deal is to translate at the very end of the question, what does that mean for you is XYZ of how I handle stress, or etc. So just kind of tying it in full circle and literally spelling it out for your audience.
So speaking of like the hiring process that looks very different, we can imagine, from higher education. So how was that process different from like the typical higher education interview process where you get 1 to 2 interviews, and then maybe an all day on campus with multiple panel interviews, meeting everyone in an organization?
So it's not as they're sorry. I was smiling at this question because as someone who does also help with recruiting and things that we do on our end, like we will get resumes and hire someone like starting Monday and they will be in the office and onboarded by Friday. It really, like, there's no on campus, there's not a lot of that. Some roles do, some roles, like I think, you know, the higher up or if you work with a larger team, they will want you to kind of interview with folks, but it's not nearly as long. And I think this is kind of to Jean's point of like, you do want to be memorable, you want to share that you're qualified, and then they'll go resume review, first call maybe with their HR team, next one's going to be with your supervisor, the team you work with, and then you get a response. And I think just maybe like outside of higher education, it's a little bit faster just because there is more of an urgent need for these roles to be filled. While I was searching, I even looked at a human resources role at institutions. That process still took just a little longer than most other places. And I think also, not to say that we aren't as efficient, but gathering, you know, 6 panels and people to do an interview in higher education, whether you're on the interviewee or interviewer side, like it takes a lot versus corporate wise, it's very like, you've got 2 people, cool, that's enough. And so it is a little bit faster. I haven't had a month-long process with one institution. But it did take long to like land a job in the full searching one.
For me, the legal industry is a little bit of its own little beast, I would say. So during my first law firm, I was interviewed only 2 times for around 30 minutes to an hour each. And then I was hired. That process took around probably 2 weeks. At my second institution, which I'm at now, for my first position here, I was interviewed for 3 different rounds. They're around 30-minute interviews each. And that actually took around 2 to 3 months from applying to the actual job offer letter, mainly because my folks on HR, they told me later on that I was their first choice, but the issue was getting the HR approval process through.
So for me, the hiring process was still lengthy. So I had 3 rounds, except they're not like full day. They were half an hour on the phone for the first one, and then a presentation was involved. So this also is going to, relates to what you're applying to. So if you're going to apply for a recruiter type role, you're probably not going to need to give a presentation per se. But for me in the learning and development space, that was asked of me to provide a presentation, and they did not tell me in advance what it is. So they told me that they're going to tell me 1 week in advance the topic, and you have exactly 1 week before the actual interview date to present and gather information and etc. So they gave me a topic, never done that before, didn't know anything about it, so I had to take time to research. And the other part that was interesting was in that particular presentation interview, there were 7 different people in the interview from 7 different departments. So in healthcare, compliance is a big thing. So there was somebody from compliance, a couple of doctors, etc. So some of these people, now that I've been working there, I've never seen them again. So just to say that you don't know who's going to be in your interview or your presentation or etc., because it's free form or whatever the manager or who they want to invite. So that's how that goes. And then the third round was a short conversation to see if you're a good fit culturally. So that was where it was just one-on-one with the supervisor and I to just kind of get to know me, to see if I would mesh well with the team, with the company. And then they did a reference check. So not too different, I feel, from student affairs, minus the all day thing, but still, you know, getting your references and possible homework that you need to do in advance, case studies or etc. So that's not unusual.
So it looks like we have time for about 2 more questions. So for our penultimate question, if people are considering transitioning out of student affairs, would you suggest doing it while you're early in your career? Is it ever too late to switch out, or harder to switch when you're later on in your career?
I'm gonna take a stab at this question. So I don't think that it's too early or too late. So I shared with you all that I've been in student affairs and the career services industry for over 10 years. So maybe for some of you, that seems like a long time. So I think it's more of what you feel internally resonates with you in terms of values and what you like about your job and etc. The piece that I want to share with you in regards to this question is that don't get hung up on job titles. So right now, maybe you're an associate director, okay? And let me tell you, there are no associate directors in the corporate industry. There are no associate directors in my organization. So if you kind of get hung up on job titles, then you're gonna have a little bit of a difficult time pivoting to your next role. So in the corporate world, let me tell you, coordinators can make a lot of money. So there was a position that I was looking into at Autodesk, tech company in the Bay Area, and a project coordinator position was going for 90,000 plus. So maybe for you, a lot of people in student affairs, oh, a coordinator is very entry level. So I think don't get hung up on the titles, but truly look at the job description of what is going to interest you. Are you going to be excited to do that role? Because student affairs pay scale and job titles will not equal to outside industry and job titles.
So we have time for one last question. I open this up to any of our panelists to answer. So what was the most difficult part and the most surprising part about transitioning out of student affairs in higher education?
I'm gonna take this one if y'all don't mind. I think the most difficult part, I think somebody mentioned it in the question, was that imposter syndrome, right? And so I got my master's in student affairs. I worked in student affairs. I was a student leader. This is kind of what I know. And I think for me, particularly in the position that I was transitioning to, being kind of a, if you want to think about it as an internal consultant for this dean, I didn't know anything about what was on my job description, subject matter wise. And so a lot of the pieces is going to be to overcome that imposter syndrome, because if you think about it, you got the job because someone believed in you and somebody saw the potential in your skills, right? And so overcoming that imposter syndrome, I work in IT now. I don't know anything about technical speak, right? I work on the business side of IT. Every day is a challenge for me, but every day is a fun challenge and an opportunity to learn more, right? So that's probably the most difficult thing to kind of to leave and transition is this. I think we talked a little bit about it. Sometimes your identity is kind of strung to that student affairs background, right? Like I'm a student affairs practitioner. And I think I learned to say that student affairs or project management or marketing or IT is something that I do, it's not who I am. So that's the first piece. The most surprising part is like, I can actually do a lot of different things that I didn't think that I could do, right? And so a lot of part of when I was working internationally, I did a lot of international travel. I was meeting with a lot of different people. I do IT project management right now. Like we talk about like different methodologies. We talk about user stories and all that type of stuff. About like 8 months ago, I had no idea about those things, right? So I think a lot of folks who are in student affairs, they go in because they love that aspect of being at a university, being a lifelong learner. And I think that skill set is going to carry to different industries because a lot of people value that. And one thing that I'm going to leave you with is for folks who are transitioning out of student affairs, one thing that somebody told me who's in the consulting industry said, don't be too kind of narrowly focused on what you want to be as your next occupation. Just try to find the next great opportunity and you can always reinvent yourself. So that's what I'll leave you with you today.
So I can answer this. So healthcare. So now that I'm in healthcare, couldn't tell you a lot. So the first month I'd be sitting in meetings and we're talking about Senate Bills 464. First time I ever heard that, I'm like, what's a Senate Bill 464? So the point is that you're gonna go into a new space that you don't know a lot of information about. So you're gonna have to do homework. So after that meeting of SB 464 Senate Bill, I quickly read everything I could of what that meant. And there are projects that I've been given the past couple of months. I have no idea how to do them. I don't know how to use this or that. So that's where I YouTube. I YouTube a lot of tutorials and I watch them. And then I apply them to my job and see if it works. So that's okay if you don't know everything. And yes, imposter syndrome is real. But at the end of the day, I think give yourself some grace. Just try your best. That's all you got. That you try your best, you do what you can to be resourceful, whether that is looking up YouTube videos for tutorials, asking a colleague to help train you on a certain system, and etc. So just give yourself some grace. You'll get the hang of it.
So I know we're getting close to time. I do want to wrap this up and be respectful of everyone's time today. Thank you so much to our 4 panelists, Jean, Leslie, Michele, MyLinh, for all your wisdom and knowledge. We appreciate you so much for taking time out of today to be with us and share your stories. You can connect with the panelists on respective platforms, which I am, oh, it's already copied into the chat. I also want to thank the APIKC Region 5 and 6 representatives and committee members at this time, if they want to turn on their own videos so we can see them also. Especially to April, who was my partner in really helping create this event and ran the logistics behind the scene for this event. Will, who's not on the call with us, but was our Zoom master and coordinated the webinar session for us. Andrew, Leslie, and Whitney for help moderating the chat and being present today in case April or I needed to leave for a brief moment. We will be sending a quick assessment at the end of this webinar. Please take some time to fill it out. If you look in the chat, we also have events coming up and we encourage you all to attend. Oh my goodness, I forgot about Nelson. Also Nelson, who's part of our committee. And then lastly, if you're interested in being more involved in volunteering with NASPA and the APIKC, my position, the APIKC Region 5 position, will be open at the end of the national conference. And so you all can, if you all are interested and in Region 5, please feel free to reach out to me and I can help guide you into the right people's radars to take over this position. And feel free to reach out to Andrew in Region 6. If you want to get involved in Region 6, we're always looking for more amazing people to get involved with. And with that, we just wanted to thank everyone for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
And panelists, please stick back for a picture. April, you can stop it.